Jesus for the cleansing power. Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you fully trusting in His grace this hour? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed?
Jason broke his arm last night, and or this morning, early this morning, and so that's what he was referencing. Some of you may have heard Jason's name and said, "What's wrong with Jason?" Well, he broke his arm, and they've got to check it with a surgeon to see if it needs surgery or anything like that. So, if you would keep him in your prayers. I talked to him this afternoon. He's still in quite a bit of pain, but it was the left humerus up here, and it was a complete break, so it was pretty tough on him. And I asked him, I said, "Well, did they set it at the ER?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "How was that?" And he said, "Well, they gave me medicine to forget about it, so I don't really remember it, but I'm hoarse." So there was probably a lot of yelling involved. I don't know. But anyway, do keep him in your prayers. And VBS was so busy last week, I didn't get around to getting my hair cut, so my hair is going to fall at some point, and it's going to make this little curl here. And I'm not going to remember to wipe it back here in a little bit, and I'm going to finish like that. And I'm going to disappoint someone that I love very much when that happens. So I just want you to know up front that that's going to happen. You know, not long after I obeyed the gospel, the high school there in Caddo hosted as they did every year during that time, the basketball homecoming dance. We had a football homecoming and a basketball homecoming, and there was a dance. And of course, when football was there, I went to the football dance because I could cut a rug as bad as anybody in my days before Christ. But when all of my friends were going to the spring dance and I was not going, I told them, "Well, I'm not going to go this time." And one of my lifelong friends at that time, he said, "Well, why are Christians so boring? You can't do anything that you used to do." You know, that first year in Christianity, I admit it seemed like everything that I did before to have fun, I couldn't do anymore as a Christian. Not that I was a terribly bad guy, but, you know, going to parties or you know, going to the dance and doing the things that most high school kids do and don't even think twice about, I couldn't do anymore. I remember I don't know, Rusty, if I should ever reveal this, but I'm going to. I was in the show choir in high school. You know, with the tuxedo and the sequin cummerbund and the sequin bow tie. Yeah, it was that bad, Rusty. And so I remember that one of the concerts was coming up, and they had a song in there that was a religious song, and there was instrumental music to it. And here I had been in the show choir for a year now, and I said to the choir director, I can't sing this song. And she was just floored. I mean, you've been doing it up to this time. Why can't you do it now? Do you not think it's fun? Do you not think it's good? And I remember thinking in my mind, I wish I could do these things, but as a Christian, I know I shouldn't do these things. And so my life took a very drastic change in Christianity. And I have to say, it was a struggle to stay faithful because the temptations to have fun and were everywhere. And I couldn't do them. And things that I had always done, I couldn't do anymore. And I remember when Colin asked me that question, why are Christians so boring? You know, questions like that have been asked down through the ages by many people. In every generation of the church, I think there have been those who are asking, why are you so boring? Why do you not do what you used to do? Why can't you do the things that you've always done? Yet being maligned and being mocked or asked that question as Christians, that's not something new. Our motives, Jesus said, are going to be impugned. Our conduct will be mocked. Our service is going to be questioned. But we have to stay faithful. I'm reminded of Peter's words in 1 Peter 4, beginning in verse 3. He says, "For the time that is past suffices for doing what the Gentiles want to do." When you were in your old life, in the past life, you did what all the Gentiles did, what everyone who was separated from God. Living in sensuality, passions, drunkenness, orgies, drinking parties, and lawless idolatry. Right from the hand of Peter. And then he says, with respect to this, they are surprised when you do not join them in the same flood of debauchery, and they malign you. the old lifestyle that you used to live. Your friends are going to look at that and say, how come you don't do what you've always done with us? It's not as fun without you, Sam. It's not as fun whenever you're not there with us. Why can you not do it? And Peter says, they are surprised when you do not join them. I know you teens have experienced this today when you withhold from doing things that you know are wrong, and some of your friends come in and question why can't you do that? They're surprised that you don't just do everything that they would do. Peter also says it is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than for doing evil. 1 Peter 3 and verse 16 and 17. It's better if you choose to suffer for doing good, or if anyone suffers, let him suffer as a Christian. If you're going to be maligned, if you're going to be mocked, let it be because you've done what was right. Why? Because Jesus would say, if the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own, but because you are not of the world, because I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. John 15, 18, and 19. So we understand, we see as Christians that as the world looks at our lives, that there's some question about why Christianity is boring according to the world. Insults and ridicule are not new, but they are a sign, really, of the blessing of God. Blessed are you when you suffer persecution, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 5 and verse 10. But Christians are accused of being boring. And so tonight I want to answer a couple of questions here. We say, are Christians really that boring? When the world looks at it, they say, well, you're boring. Are Christians really that boring? I want to look at 3 questions to help answer that question. It's sort of as when Jesus said, I will answer your question when you answer mine. Let me ask these questions. Are there reasons for God's morality? God's morality is what holds us back from the world's vices that the world says are fun. Are there reasons for God's morality? Number 2, do our hearts have any bearing on this question? How I feel or what I appreciate or desire, does that change a Christian's boring nature? And then finally, we'll ask the question, can we have fun while being Christians? A very simple question. Let me ask first of all, are there reasons for God's morality? I submit that there are 3 reasons, at least 3 reasons, why God gives us the morals that we give Him. First of all is that Christian morals reveal God. They tell us who God is. For in the gospel, Romans 1:17, in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. Calling back from the book of Habakkuk in chapter 2, the just or the righteous shall live by faith. But a lot of people come to this verse and they ask the question, if the gospel reveals the righteousness of God, is it revealing, number 1, the righteousness of God Himself being on display for us to see, or number 2, the righteousness which God appoints for us to have? And the answer to those questions is yes. I think Paul is purposefully ambiguous here, because the righteousness of God, that is the righteousness that He exhibits, is on display in the gospel, and that is the very same righteousness that He wants us to follow in our lives as it is revealed in the gospel. For in it is revealed the righteousness of God. By this we know that we have come to know Him. Here's how we can say, I know God. There's a lot of people who don't understand the answer to that question. How do you know that you know God? 2 Thessalonians 1 and verse 8, he says that in flaming fire He's taken vengeance on those that know not God and have not obeyed the gospel. A few weeks ago, we looked at what it means to obey the gospel, but look at that first phrase, those that do not know God. If I do not know God, I will receive the vengeance of Jesus Christ. Therefore, I want to know, how can I know God? God actually answers that through the pen of John in 1 John 2 and verse 3. And by this we know that we have come to know Him. We know that we are intimate with Him, that we understand who He is and what He is and what He means to us. By this we have come to know Him. Whoever says, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot the next statement. If we keep his commandments. That's it. I know God. Then you must be keeping his commandments. No, I don't really try to keep his commandments. I just know God. If you are not keeping his commandments, you do not and you cannot know God. He continues, if someone says, I know him, but does not keep his commandments, he is a liar. And the truth is not in him. If we are going to please God, we've got to keep his commandments. And someone say, well, but commandment keeping, that just seems so shallow. It's so shallow. If your Christianity is just about commandment keeping, well, I guess I'm maybe not a fan of that phrase because of how people have looked at it, but really commandment keeping introduces us to God because the commandments are a very projection of the character of God. In other words, this is how we can know God through commandment keeping, is that those commandments aren't just arbitrary rules that God made up. It's not like one day he said, I don't want people to kill one another, so don't kill one another. He didn't just reason through morality or some golden philosophy. God is actually giving us the nature of who he is. If he were on earth today, think about this. If God were on earth today, he would be the one who wouldn't drink. He would be the one who wasn't dancing. He would be the one who wasn't smoking. He would be the one who doesn't incite lust through immodest dress. He would be the one that everyone is pointing at and saying, why doesn't God have fun? He would be that person in the corner not joining in the excess of riot that the world is running in. And so when we say we know God by keeping his commandments, we know who God is. Because he is the one that wouldn't do those things. He is the one that holds himself back from those things. And he's the one who would be ridiculed most on this earth. Why doesn't God have any fun? Not only do Christian morals reveal unto us God, but Christian morals actually protect us. Under the Old Testament, the dietary and hygienic and social laws that often help protect people, they often help protect them against disease and against injury. I think of Solomon and his review of drunkenness. When he says in Proverbs 23, beginning in verse 29, who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has strife? Who has complaining? Who has wounds without cause? Who has redness of eyes? The answer, those who tarry over wine, those who go to try mixed wine. Do not look at wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup and goes down smoothly. In the end, it bites like a serpent and stings like an adder. Alcohol's danger are clear and present to anyone. You don't have to. You can go to the Center for Disease Control and look at alcohol statistics, from drinking and driving to alcohol poisoning to domestic abuse to how many violent crimes and aggravated crimes are committed under the influence of alcohol. Alcohol's danger is clear and present. But I like how Solomon finishes that paragraph. It actually spills over to Proverbs 24, verse 1 and 2, when he says, be not envious of evil men, nor desire to be with them, for their hearts devise violence and their lips talk of trouble. Don't look at the excess of riot that the world goes into and say, oh, I wish that I could be a part of that. The prohibitions against drunkenness and fornication and idolatry and greed and all these other things are there to help protect God's children from crime and injury and faithlessness, unwanted pregnancies, lasciviousness, and lewdness. These are powerful desires. And we always fail when we seek to control them, because they always end up controlling us. And so Christian morals help protect us from ourselves. And a third reason that I think that God has given us Christian morals is that Christian morals really respect others. Think about the Ten Commandments and the social aspect of many of them. Don't kill, or don't steal, Don't covet your neighbor's wife. Don't lie. Those laws were there to protect everyone from their neighbors. Similarly, today in Christianity, in the morality that we have, it demonstrates a respect for others. Nowhere else will you find the golden rule of do unto others as you would have them do unto you in Matthew 7 and verse 12. There's a reason for Christian morals, and they help show respect for one another, even for those who are outside the church. Second question. Do our hearts have anything or any bearing on the question of Christians' boredom or Christians' boringness? Many people believe Satan's lie, I think. Satan's lie is that what's fun for one person must be fun for everybody. There's a lot of people who believe that. This is fun to me. It's fun to me to go to the drinking parties and get smashed out of my gourd. That's fun to me. You should come along and join us. But we understand, I think most of us, that the truth is not everyone enjoys the same thing. Plus, not only that, but our tastes for things that we enjoy change. They change. Sometimes they change as we mature. Certainly there's times of maturity in our lives. We look back and we don't enjoy the same things that we used to enjoy. At least hopefully. We've grown up a little bit. But not just through maturity. Sometimes we change things by choice. Things that I used to love, I don't pine after anymore. They don't have as strong a hold on me anymore. I might enjoy them a little while. I remember when I was in high school, I used to love video games, but I don't love video games, and a large part of that was a decision that I was wasting too much time with them, and they were controlling too much of my time, and so I shut them down. Not necessarily that they were sinful, I had better things to do, and so I don't do them anymore. I just have a different change. I've changed my choices, and sometimes our choices change by force. If you end up incarcerated, what you once loved on the outside, you probably won't love as much on the inside because you can't do it. Or if you're under oppression by some other regime or government or something like that, it certainly can change what we enjoy or what we partake in order to for recreational time. Paul described life before Christ in Ephesians chapter 2. He says, "And you were dead in the trespasses and sin." We understand the wage of sin is death. We follow along with Paul's reasoning here in Ephesians 2 and verse 1, that a spiritual death occurred because of our sin, because of our iniquity, because we have broken the law of God. And then he goes on to describe that life of sin. He says that in which you once walked, following, get this, the course of this world. Paul often uses the contrast between the church and the world to show that there's a distinction between Christian living and carnal living. And he says, when you were dead in the trespasses and sin, when you walked like everybody else walked. When what everyone else said, well, this is the fun way, this is the way to go, this is the way to walk. He said, you followed in the course of this world. But then he goes on to further to say, following the prince of the power of the air. Well, who is that? He goes on to call him the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience. What spirit is in the work or is in the sons of disobedience? The devil. The prince of the power of the air is the devil. Not only before you came to Christ, were you walking according to the course of the world, you were walking according to the passions of the devil. And he says, among whom we all once lived. Paul says none of us were estranged from that. We were all engaged in that kind of living. Every Christian, every non-Christian has at one time walked in this path of disobedience, whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and were by nature children of wrath like the rest of mankind. So before Christ, they were dead in sin. Before Christ, they were worldly and carnal. Before Christ, they followed the devil who was working in disobedience. Before Christ, they followed their own passions and lust. Before Christ, they were children of wrath. And then verse 4 starts, but God, who is rich in mercies, God, has changed everything. When they gave themselves to Jesus, their passions changed. And I would say they changed by choice. Too often we think that what we like today is something we can't help. But just as God commands us to love Him and to love one another, we can control our emotions, we can control our passions and the things that we desire. Jesus spoke of those, for example, in Matthew 19 and verse 12, those who became eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom. These were Christians who gave up pursuing the passions that would lead them astray just so they could be part of the church in their day. And that's what we have to do. We change what we enjoy. We change it from what the world says is fun to what God says we ought to do. That means Christians must give up the old ways. You know, it's interesting in Paul's discussion of in Romans chapter 6 about the reenactment of the gospel. He mentions that we've crucified the old man of sin. We've put him to death. In Colossians 3 and verse 5, he says, mortify your members which are upon the earth. And he goes on to a litany of sins. The old man is buried because he is dead. Christians must give up the old ways. But not only do we give them up, but we have to find happiness in following God. And Paul wrote in Philippians 2 and verse 5, have this mind in you which was also in Christ. We see in Hebrews that though he were a son, yet he learned obedience. And not just obeying to obey, but because he loved obedience in following God. If Jesus is the, here's an old term, if he's the square standing in the corner who is not engaging in the carnal activities, he shouldn't be alone. He should be surrounded by every brother and sister in Christ. Yes, our heart has something to do with what we find boring. We can control our heart and choose to take enjoyment in what God finds pleasure in. That leads us to the last question. Can we as Christians have fun? Really, that's a silly question, I know. Of course we can have fun. We have all kinds of fun. Often the devil tries to convince people, this is fun, and what he convinces them is fun really isn't. I know a young man who was in college, and he liked to abuse alcohol and some drugs, and he went out into the streets one night, and he decided it would be a good idea to acquire some car stereos that were not his. And as a result, the police started chasing him because he was not just vandalizing vehicles, he was stealing car stereos. And so he was running away. He's running away, and he's in an addled state, high from the drugs and the alcohol. He trips and he falls on a stick, and the stick hit around right here on his leg and ran up on the inside of his thigh. It was horrible, horrible. And I remember the drain tube that he had because it kept getting infection. It was terrible. But this is fun. Often what the devil says is fun is not. That wouldn't be fun. You know that. There are many activities that are wholesome and faith-building and enjoyable in this life that even non-Christians love to engage in. When I was in high school, the later years, we were going to prom, but we didn't do prom. We did the prom alternative. And when Julie and I were in high school, there was one other Christian in the high school from 9th grade up through 12th grade that was in school. We were the only three. But when Mrs. Rowland had the prom alternative, there were 40 or 50 kids there. Because the good, wholesome, faith-building activities that she did at her home and hosting that were more entertaining to those 50 to 60 or 40 to 50 kids than going to prom. They weren't even Christians, but they had fun. We need to find our greatest joy, however, in pleasing God. There's a song we sing that comes from Philippians 4 and verse 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again I say, rejoice. Now, that's in the imperative mood. That means it's a command. I'm commanding you to rejoice. To have fun in life, that's rejoicing. But where does Paul say to have it? In the Lord. As he was opening chapter 3 of Philippians, finally, my brethren, rejoice in the Lord. Rejoice in God. Find joy in following and pleasing God. Jesus would say, and he who sent me is with me. Talking about the Father himself. He's with me. He's not left me alone. Why? For I always do the things that are pleasing to him. John 8:29. What did Jesus do? He did the things that were pleasing to God. Paul would say, discern what is pleasing to the Lord. Ephesians 5 and verse 10. That's how we rejoice in the Lord, is we make the choice to turn our hearts and our desires not into what I want, but what God wants, whatever pleases him. In Colossians 1, Paul says, we have not ceased to pray for you, asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will and all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so as to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. Now get this, fully pleasing to him, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. Colossians 1, 9 and 10. Is it clear? Becoming a Christian means changing what you desire. Before Christ, we are selfish. We are looking for instant gratification and pleasures of the flesh. But after Christ, once we give ourselves over to Christ, we put away that childish selfishness, worldliness, and carnality, and we find happiness just in making God happy. I just want to make him happy. After a while, my friends stopped asking me why Christianity was so boring. Not long after that, the question became so foreign to me. I didn't really understand it. I had a great time pleasing God. I wasn't bored at all. I was excited each time I was able to grow to a spiritual level and accomplish great things in the name of God. I wasn't bored at all. And since then, I can say I've had the time of my life ever since I changed what my enjoyments were. Do you enjoy Christian living? Do you wake up each day excited that you get to please the Creator of the universe, that your faith and your service and your love, the deeds which you do with your hands, have the potential to bring excitement to heaven itself? Don't you find that enjoyment? Are you one of those who are a sullen Christian, wondering why the former days are better than these days? Solomon said it's a foolish question. Don't ask yourself, why were the former days better than these? Enjoy today and make it the Lord's day. Make the choice today to rejoice in the Lord. But if you're not in the Lord, if you're still living for self, isn't it time to step back and let the expert of life take over? To put God in control, to seek his pleasure and not your own? You realize there is nothing that stands between you and happiness, not just happiness for a few days, but happiness into eternity. The only thing that stands between you and giving your life to Jesus are these aisles. And tonight, if you desire to come to him and be added to his church and receive the gladness that God so freely offers, won't you make a trip down one of these aisles while we stand and while we sing?
And you've been to Jesus for the cleansing power. Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you fully trusting in his grace this hour? Are you washed in the blood